Hi, my name is Oscar. I'll be talking about my reading experience and all that fun stuff for Dracula. So, off with the plot. We start off with reading from the diary and journal entries of Jonathan Harker, who is one of our main characters. He is visiting Transylvania to help Dracula procure a peculiar estate in London because Dracula wants an estate that is close to a mental asylum, which is viewed as very weird. And then within his first days of arrival, he gets warnings from townsfolk, sees strange flames on the journey to the castle, and then strange actions from Count Dracula himself, such as climbing through the walls, locking up doors. And from there, Harker starts to realize that not only is Dracula a monster, but that is a monster that is keeping him prisoner in a castle. And then after that realization, our book jumps to a different perspective where we get a snippet of a newsletter, which is of a shipwreck that has crew members dead, one strapped to the wheel, and this is meant to signify Dracula's arrival in London because Harker just kind of realized, oh my god, I just let this monster go to London, oh no, right? And which then shifts where our overall setting is from Transylvania to a seaside town in London. From there, we then get perspectives from characters named Mina and Lucy. Lucy, who is a bride to be, who resembles the perfect Victorian woman. She has many suitors after her. She is meant to be this angelic and lovable person, and Mina is Harker's fiance that he mentions repeatedly throughout the reading. And they go on vacation together, for instance, to celebrate the end of the school year since Mina is a teacher, and also Lucy's engagement. However, strange things start to happen to Lucy. She starts sleepwalking. She starts to become paler and looks sicker and drained. So essentially, she is falling very, very ill, and Mina's contemplating on getting help. Furthering into the plot, there is a dark figure that tends to be drawn to her, and as Lucy becomes ill. So there's always this dark creature in which Mina cannot tell if it's a man or a beast. And she's always looking out the window, saying that she sees, like, red eyes, stuff like that. Eventually, Mina does get help from a group of people. One of them is Dr. Van Helsing. And crazy enough, all the people that she gets help from are the suitors of Lucy. One of them being her fiance, and the other suitors in which she rejected. They try helping her by doing, for instance, like 4 different blood transfusions. And eventually, Lucy dies. But wait, there's more. She dies, but then turns into a vampire. And because she's now this monstrous creature just like Dracula, she's then killed the people who loved her. Kind of ironic. From there, Dracula then makes Mina his next victim, and she does become infected, except she doesn't turn into a vampire. She just is, like, infected. It's like the early symptoms before you get the flu, officially, like you're coughing a little bit, but it's not really fully there, kind of like that. And it forms a psychic link to one where she has this kind of connection to Dracula without being a vampire, so it makes it easier for them to hunt him down, essentially. So basically, this whole group is hunting down Dracula as he's trying to flee back to Transylvania. There's a bunch of threats being traded back and forth between them. And they eventually intercept him with a group of gypsies that are carrying his coffin or cart, and a whole fight is essentially breaking out. He gives speeches on how he's using Mina and Lucy's as vessels to get to them, and from them corrupt other people. So it's almost like a giant, bloody takeover, essentially. Quincy, which is one of Lucy's past suitors, if I'm correct, does get injured and dies during this fight and encounter with Dracula. However, characters like Harker are now freed, for instance, from Dracula's prison and control. So it's kind of bittersweet knowing that a few characters have died on this journey. But at the end, the remaining characters that we have do remain some peace. So that is like a nice little quick synopsis of our major plot points. So now let's go through themes. There are 3 themes that I want to point out, which was women's sexuality, religion, and madness. And so one of the biggest themes that I did talk about a lot, not only is it going to be talked about in the next slide, which is elements, but I also really did do a deep dive on it with the document that we had to write. But in terms of woman sexuality, it's really shown with the idea of a vampire vixen versus a pure woman. And this also ties to the religion theme, so we're going to go hand to hand in this. We see this such as how Dracula's brides, within the first, 5 chapters, are introduced. Brides are seen as impure and monsters for a type of lustful or hungry nature. Even when Lucy is a vampire, she is still this hungry, blood-driven vampire that we kind of see Dracula as, but the difference is the vampiric nature when it comes to the woman versus Dracula. All the women, all of a sudden, when they become vampiric, are now sexual beings or more lustful beings. They're seen as seductive, they're seen as victims. Whereas Dracula, oh yeah, he's just a monster, but when it comes to the woman, they're now seductive and vixens. And they have a lustful, hungry nature, which is what makes it interesting. There are even themes of the sublime with how the brides are seen. They're seen as, Harker describes them as, oh, I just wanted them to kiss me, but I'm worried that they're going to eat me. Hello? And when Lucy does get transformed, she gets basically condemned for being this lustful, predatory vampire. But it's peculiar because with Dracula, yes, he's still being, considered a monster for, eating people and taking their blood. But when it comes to characters like Lucy and the Brides, it's characterized much differently because it seems like almost they're lustful for being hungry for blood, essentially. And she is then killed to have her soul free and forgiven and go through all that type of salvation. And one of the biggest quotes that Dracula says during all this is that, your girls that you all love are mine already, and through them you and others shall yet be mine. And it kind of reinforces that idea of that Dracula has this ultimate pull towards women, and when it comes to regards to their sexuality, Dracula almost serves as a driving force of the metaphor that man versus beast, men's harmful and huge driving desire, essentially. And how Victorian women during this time were outcast for society for even exploring their sexuality while not being married. Or if they were to be betrothed, if they still had relations with others, they were still condemned from society because they belonged to one and one only. Or when they broke that, for instance, in this case with Dracula, they are now seen as monsters, which is why I kind of thought that idea of exploring women's sexuality was an interesting theme, and rather the idea of it being condemned. Whereas Mina, she's still seen as pure because she was quote-unquote able to fight against his corruption. And like I said, religion was another big thing because you have the idea of being condemned and salvation when it came to their sexualities as well. The ideas of religion had been used where her soul is free because how Lucy went through a second death. Her soul was now redeemed from this monstrous behavior that she then had. But religion was not just used for that. It also used as a theme to protect from evil, such as Harker having a crucifix to protect and ward against Dracula. It's used to ward off against him because there are times where Dracula would try to go after Harker if he accidentally cut his neck while shaving, and the crucifix is what stopped him from that. It mirrors the battle of good and evil, which is what I find really interesting. It's almost like, oh wow, Dracula's like the embodiment of Satan or something. It's almost what the story tries to reinforce, that also faith is what restores its faith in that belief that helps fight against this type of evil as well. So that's where religion kind of ties into the story. And then as well as madness, I thought was an interesting theme. Because in most of the Gothic readings we had, there is some type of form of madness. And although I wouldn't say madness is the dominant theme in here, I did think that its take on it was interesting. Because when we see stories like Telltale Horror or The Black Cat, madness is seen throughout the story. But here it serves as a driving force for almost the idea of religion, such as how Renfield is seen as almost a prophet, a foreshadower. Because he's the only one that fully acknowledges Dracula's existence and almost mirrors it. Because he's a patient at the asylum where we have our doctor characters work at. And he obsesses over eating things like bugs and other animals. And he perceives Dracula a lot more than others, where it's like he's almost talking to him, similar to how prophets would talk to higher beings, gods, all that stuff like that. But also back to the idea of woman's sexuality, or the woman during this time. Mina, or in this story rather, Mina is fearing the madness of becoming corrupt, like Lucy, corrupt of becoming this monster, since Dracula trying to make her his next victim. Back and speaking of, we have the gothic elements of the female goth. Women are often seen as innocent throughout this. They're described as these innocent beings, these vulnerable, weak beings that are basically a damsel in distress. And like I said before, when they transform into these vampires, it's a metaphor for something not socially acceptable, such as sexuality, or even becoming a modern woman. That there is something corrupting them that no longer makes them innocent, and it reflects the idea of the female gothic genre of it mirroring women's fears and anxieties, because women were seen as belonging to this one thing, or their vulnerability would then be weaponized against them, either to other men, to their status, to their relations, to their families. It would essentially just destroy them. The idea of that their corruption physically personifies and ripples the world around them. And we see this a lot when it comes to Lucy dying, the threats that Dracula makes us seeing these women as possessions, nothing more. They are only a vessel to get more and more victims. Another one of that is horror. Examples are shown through imprisonment, death, crawling on walls, etc. Because these are all things that our characters do get repulsed by, such as Dracula crawling on the walls, such as being disgusted by seeing this figure almost like not eating Lucy, but doing something to Lucy, like what Mina sees when she catches Mina sleepwalking. We see this through of how there is a baby that died from the brides because they ate him or something. We see that all as repulsion and disgust. Even the characters themselves see it as repulsion and disgust, but yet there's still that giant fear behind it. And then last but not least, you have the atmosphere, which does mimic the terror. There is a lot of suspension that's drawn through the series of our different settings, such as the journey to Dracula's castle, how we have townsfolk saying you shouldn't really go up there, it's kind of scary, this is the day that evil comes out and about. You have it being totally empty, there's no helpers. There's also the shipwreck, how there's coffins, there's people dying, and there's this unresolved mystery. Or when Lucy and Mina get to this seaside island, how there's a graveyard nearby, how there's always some type of moonlight that she's following outside. That makes it kind of eerie. And sometimes even a little bit of the sublime, where it's beautiful, but there's something off-putting about it. In terms of comparisons, I did compare it to Jane Eyre because I felt like there was a lot of mirrors between it, such as the idea of fearing madness and trying to get away from it, and this is mainly seen between Jane and Mina. So when it comes to Jane and her story, one of her driving reasons for not marrying Mr. Rochester was the fact that he had a wife, and even if she was the mad woman that she was so mad to the point where she was no longer seen as a human being, he was still married to her, and she did not want to become the next mad woman or get ridiculed by society and become that outcast, right? She is fearing that type of madness, that type of mentality. And I mean, in this case, is also fearing that same type of corruption when it comes to, after seeing what happens to Lucy. They're both trying to get away from what could happen to them or being further involved in something as well. But also the idea of trying to stay pure during a Victorian time. Jane, in this case, is trying to believe in purity, but also while having that almost feminist mindset of wanting to be equal with Mr. Rochester. So, I mean, he has to marry her when they're equals, but also that marriage is like a vow, a promise, and if you're breaking that, that's kind of bad, that's horrible. And if I were to get involved in this, my name would also be the one getting dragged. Because, let's be real, for women in the Victorian times were getting dragged more for non-socially acceptable acts than men sometimes. Especially when it came to things such as sexuality and relationships. And as well for Lucy, while trying to dodge Dracula's moves towards her and becoming the next victim or getting corrupt, the point where she can only be salvaged if she dies. But also, the idea of, there are those differences of, like, situations, because Jane is more also wants to be equal to Mr. Rochester, while in this case, Mina is trying to be as far away as Dracula as possible. But another thing that was similar was the atmosphere and how the suspense plays through within each estate. So we have the mansion or the estate that Mr. Rochester is in eventually gets burned down, and Jane's like, you don't, or even when we watch the movie as a class, we don't fully know if he's alive, if he's dead, and it adds to that kind of suspense of what's happening, what's going on, what happened around the world around me. And while in Dracula, it's more as you don't know what's happening around you, but you know that there's something off-putting and something that happened to your loved ones. And I feel like that is prevalent a lot when Mina and Lucy's relationship, especially since they were already a pre-existing friendship. And I feel like in situations like Harker and other characters, it doesn't always hit the same until we get to Lucy slowly becoming Dracula's next victim, because you could see Mina's worriness and her admiring even Lucy at some points with how she shines in certain lights. And I feel like that also showcases and mirrors a lot how even in the burned estate, Jane was still into Mr. Rochester in that scene. She was, even when she saw him blind, she was still amazed and captivated by him, similar to how Mina and Lucy are, but just on a more platonic level. I do also have my references here. Thank you for listening.